WFYI podcasts are brought to you by Visit Bloomington. With over 350 restaurants to choose from, Bloomington, Indiana is truly a food lover's paradise. Go to visitbloomington.com to discover what suits your taste.
This is WFYI News Now. It's February 6th, and I'm Abriana Herron. On today's show, a recap of last night's City-County Council meeting, legislation at the State House that advocates say could weaken debt protection laws. A bill died that could have impacted administrative burdens for medical providers. And if someone's heart stops beating on campus, are Indiana's schools prepared?
I've seen AEDs with dead batteries. I've seen AEDs locked up. I have seen AEDs with expired pads because I think they were put up and like, okay, I did it, but you didn't do it all the way.
Those stories coming up. But first, U.S. Representative Victoria Spartz will run for another term in Congress, reversing her decision not to. Jill Sheridan reports the Republican legislator now joins a crowded field of candidates vying for the seat.
Spartz announced last year that she would not seek re-election in Indiana's 5th District, saying she wanted to spend more time with her family. Now the Ukrainian-born congresswoman says after talking to constituents and considering the current political environment, she feels her work is not done. In a statement, Spartz says, quote, "As someone who grew up under tyranny, I understand the significance of these challenging times for our republic." At least 8 other Republican candidates have announced their candidacies ahead of a filing deadline this week. Spartz was first elected to the 5th District that covers parts of Hamilton, Delaware, and Madison counties in 2020. Indiana's primary elections are on May 7th. I'm Jill Sheridan.
The Indianapolis City-County Council held its monthly meeting last night. A proposal to update the city's fatal crash review process to add non-fatal crashes was given final approval. Councilor John Barth said changes to the fatal crash review aim to improve pedestrian safety.
In this way, holistic initiatives can be taken to reduce crashes, ultimately making our city streets safer for everyone.
This summer, the Department of Public Works will establish a process to determine which non-fatal crashes will be reviewed by the Fatal Crash Team and start reviewing those next year. A proposal that rezones property in Broad Ripple for redevelopment purposes was also approved. The housing project was first proposed in 2021 and received pushback from community members who said it would add too much density and traffic. It was scaled back but still received opposition. Councilor Brianne Delaney was given credit for facilitating a compromise between the developer and the community.
I want to thank both parties for working literally up until the last minute during this meeting to try to come to an agreement.
The council meeting also included the appointment and reappointment of numerous city officials. The National Consumer Law Center recently identified Indiana as having weak debt protection laws, and some advocates are concerned about how this is affecting consumers. As Violet Cumber-Weiland reports, new legislation may further weaken these protections.
Erin Macy is the director of the Indiana Community Action Poverty Institute. She says 2 bills in 2024 could harm financial protections for people in Indiana. Macy says one bill is continuing to shorten the time Hoosiers have to dispute certain charges with their banks.
Senate Bill 188 reduces the statute of limitations for someone to challenge an issue with their checking or savings account, such as being charged an overdraft fee that they felt was unfair. And it challenges the amount they could recover.
She says another bill would allow banks to assume Hoosiers agree to changes to their bank accounts if they don't respond to communication from the bank and continue to use their accounts. Macy encourages Hoosiers to watch carefully for communication from banks and respond promptly. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Violet Cumber-Weiland.
Medical providers say prior authorization creates administrative burdens for them and barriers to care for their patients. Abigail Ruman reports a GOP priority bill that would have heavily limited the use of prior authorization did not make it through committee before the Senate's deadline.
Prior authorization refers to the process where insurance companies may require pre-approval before they will cover medical services. The author of the bill pointed to prior authorization as a barrier to receiving care for many Hoosiers. But Senate Republican leader Roderick Bray says lawmakers are being careful with what they're doing fiscally, with the $1 billion Medicaid shortfall adding pressure.
We've been working in the space of healthcare costs kind of feverishly over the last few years, and there is some concern about whether this will add to costs.
Bray says it's good legislation, but the bill in its current form will not come back this session. He says some of the reporting requirements might appear in other pieces of legislation. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Abigail Ruman.
And for our final story today, Indiana is one of a few Midwest states that's collected data on the number of AEDs in schools. That's a device that tries to keep sudden cardiac arrest victims alive. But state law does not require schools to have them. Elizabeth Gabriel reports last year's data shows some Indiana schools may not be prepared to respond to cardiac arrest victims.
AED stands for Automated External Defibrillator. It's a device that sends a shock to the heart to try and revive a heartbeat. Roughly 60 miles northwest from Indianapolis, Jefferson High School in Lafayette has 25 AEDs on its campus.
This is our weight room area. This is used a bunch.
That's the school's athletic trainer, Jeff Clevenger. He points to one of the AEDs that's located where kids exercise.
So we have one mounted over here by the refrigerator.
A sudden cardiac arrest is when someone's heart stops pumping blood throughout the body and the person is no longer conscious. It can happen when someone has a heart condition. For kids, 9 out of 10 times, it's deadly. Survival chances are higher if CPR is done and someone is able to access and apply an AED within 3 minutes or less. That's 1.5 minutes to get to the AED and another 1.5 minutes to walk back to the person. People don't need to be trained to use an AED. They're pretty straightforward. Once you turn it on, it starts talking to you.
Make sure 911 is called now. Begin by exposing patient's bare chest. Remove or cut clothing if needed.
At Jefferson High School, classrooms have a map of where the devices are located so they can be found quickly. That preparation throughout the school district was partly why they were able to save 2 lives on their campuses.
If you have one at the nurse's office and she has to run up to the 3rd floor with the AED, that's not an ideal situation.
Research shows youth survival rates are nearly twice as high if AEDs are located where kids exercise on campus. But it can be difficult to determine just how many AEDs are needed per school. John Dressner with the University of Washington studies the usage of AEDs in schools. He says there's no cutoff.
I think it's fair to say that most high schools are large enough to require 4 or more AEDs.
Some Indiana schools don't meet that threshold. A state survey collected the number of AEDs in Indiana schools, and a little over half responded. Side effects found that around 40% of those schools that go up to grade 12 have less than 4 AEDs. Dressner says that may be okay for some small campuses with fewer students, but it's likely not enough for most high schools. A quarter of Indiana schools that reported data also don't have an emergency response plan to ensure people quickly know where an AED is located.
You can say I have an AED, but do you have a plan? And most of the time we don't.
That's Julie West. Her son, Jake, died in 2013 of a cardiac arrest at the high school in LaPorte, Indiana. He's one of thousands across the country who die every year. Data shows that on average, more than 7,000 kids experience an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest annually. Many people say that's rare, and it's partially why it's been difficult to require AEDs in schools. The school where Jake West died had an AED, but his mom, Julie, says it was in the coach's office and not easily accessible. She now advocates for schools to have proper safety protocols in place.
I have seen AEDs with dead batteries. I have seen AEDs locked up. I have seen AEDs with expired pads because I think they were put up and like, okay, I did it, but you didn't do it all the way.
One reason schools are reluctant to purchase AEDs is funding. There's also no law to mandate it. Federal legislation to provide schools with funding has stalled in Congress.
If we push this out year after year after year for some reason or other, there's more children that are going to die from sudden cardiac arrest because our schools are not prepared.
Elizabeth Gabriel, Side Effects Public Media.
This reporting is supported by a grant from the USC Annenberg Center for Health Journalism's 2023 Data Fellowship. That's all for today's episode of WFYI News Now. Our podcast is produced by the following people who live in your community: Darian Benson, Drew Daudelin, Kendall Antron, who composed the music for this podcast, and me, Abriana Herron. Our news director is Sarah Neal-Estes. If you like today's episode, remember to subscribe and share, and follow WFYI on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube to check in on our newsroom throughout the day. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.